Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for our daily briefing. Happy Thursday. I'm with Carole Mahoney, founder and chief sales officer, chief sales coach of Unbound Growth. Carole, thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
How are you? I'm curious how you're holding up and what you're seeing as everybody's worked from home, and you've been doing this much longer than many of us. But
Yes.
how is the rest of us adjusting?
Well, a lot of the clients that I've been working with are definitely going through the adjustment of working from home, which surprised me because having worked from home for 13 years, I thought everybody was doing it, but apparently that's not the case. I've always coached, trained, sold virtually. So I'm seeing a lot of people that they're kind of at that place where it's starting to get normal for them to be working from home. They've established the boundaries. They're starting to understand how to manage their time. It's something that took me a while to learn. But I find that a lot of people are really feeling that, that need for social interaction, that need to be able to connect with people through a platform other than Zoom. Like, as human beings, we need that kind of kinesthetic emotional attachment of being in the same space with people. And so that's been a lot of the challenge. So I find a lot of people are finding ways to get out into nature. I'm probably in the best shape I've been in months because of that, because I haven't been able to travel and get out and kind of explore. And so even though I've been working from home for 13 years and I'm used to it, I at least had that, I know I can go out if I want to. So now that that's been taken away, we're kind of feeling trapped, I think. And so scrambling.
And Carole, your group works with many companies out there. Are you hearing that they're going to bounce right back, that they're going to get back into their ways of being in office as things reopen?
I would say about 60 to 70% of the companies that I've been talking to are thinking that they're going to bounce back into it. But then there's a couple of companies that I've been talking to and some that I've been working with that have always been remote. But it's a much smaller percentage of it. So there's about, I'd say 60, 70% are thinking that they're going to get back to it. Or maybe have 1 or 2 days where people are working from home and try to schedule it so that the office isn't so overcrowded. And then there are others that are why didn't we do this years ago? Why are we spending all of this money on commercial office space and dealing with the congested cities and, spending 2 or 3 hours of our time sitting in a car frustrated because we're sitting in traffic. And so I'm seeing a little bit of that too, where they're the new normal is working from home. But unfortunately, what a lot of people don't realize is that only about 40 or 41% of salespeople are suited for working from home, that they have the disciplines and the mindset and the skill sets to actually be productive. And so I think one of the things we're going to see is that there's going to be a need for training people on how to do that, even though it seems second nature to some of us.
It's an interesting area to think about, which is the training of work at home. I wanted to get your thought as you've looked at overall productivity and starting to bounce back. What are you seeing out there as we go forward and look about reopening and resuming? What are some of the plans and practices you're seeing, and does this data match your clients?
It does seem like it's matching some of what I'm seeing with my clients. One of the things that's interesting is that I am seeing the meeting volume go up. However, the meetings themselves aren't necessarily as impactful as they were before because people still aren't ready to make a lot of decisions. And so the meetings that they're having are more about discovery and connecting and reconnecting with people. And I think that has a lot to do with the salespeople aren't exactly confident as to what to say. They're afraid of saying something that's going to offend people. They're afraid they're going to come off as inauthentic or unempathetic if they aren't able to do that and then start talking about some problems. So more meetings are getting booked because I think people are looking for that connection. They're looking for people to talk to, but I'm still looking for some insights and data into what is the quality of those meetings that are happening right now.
Are you seeing any changes in the way in which teams are organizing themselves to go build pipeline today?
I am. And one of the things that I'm seeing is that there's certainly a lot less sales emails that are going out. There's probably about 20 to 25% less emails that are going out. And the responses to that has dropped a lot. I'm seeing sequences and, automated sort of outbound types of things are not as effective, and companies are doing the smart thing and pausing those, or, otherwise they're going to seem like they're tone deaf and irrelevant. I am seeing more calls being happening because people, again, they're wanting to connect. Cold calls are going up. Connect rates, as you see here, they did take that dip, but they are starting to go back up again.
Yep.
And one of the things that I'm seeing is that if you've done initial connect with someone, a lot of my clients anyway are actually using text messaging as a means to connect with people. And not necessarily cold, they don't know who you are, but maybe you've left a voicemail, maybe you've sent an email, maybe you've had a brief connect and you want to re-engage with them. So I'm seeing text messaging becoming something that's a little bit more commonplace, because calling into someone's office when they're not there is not exactly productive, but everyone's got their cell phone on them.
Absolutely. Are you finding that do you respond well if you get pinged via text message yourself? Is that something that you welcome? And what is required to earn that right?
I do respond more to text message than I do to email, and my team knows that. So if they need my attention right away, they know to text me, send me an email, and I might get to it at the end of the day. But I think that the thing that's required for this is some sort of a level of familiarity, because I get annoyed when people text me and I don't know who they are and they're asking me for something big. So it has to be taken in baby steps. So call and say, this is Carole. I'm calling because I've been talking with these kinds of people about these types of things. And then sending a brief text message, curious how things are going on in your world. Would there be a time this week that we can connect to see how things are panning out for you? And really trying to just get engagement to happen versus set the meeting versus uncover the problem. So it's really more about getting people to engage in small steps and small baby steps.
I think it's great. I think it's a great new channel. And I think it's a huge signal when deals are coming together, when you see that the texting is happening. From the outbound motion, you mentioned sequences and changes there. What will sequences look like over the next 6 to 9 months? How has this experience changed the way we're going to outbound?
I think that we're going to see sequences. I think before we saw them much more in shorter, like, a week or 2 weeks. I think we're going to start to see them being spread out a little bit more. I think we're going to start to see them be a little, one of the things of sequences that used to always drive me crazy is that they tend to make a lot of assumptions. And so I think that if we're smart about this, that we're going to start to see sequences where we are trying to use those sequences to take the baby steps and make them if-then kinds of things. So if they respond to this, then we send them that. Versus the type of sequence where we're going to send this on this day, and then this on this day, regardless of what they do. So I think we're going to start to get a little bit more smart about them in terms of what are they actually engaging with and building our sequences off of that versus here's our playbook and we're going to execute it verbatim.
Love it. I wanted to get your thoughts on coaching. This is what your profession is. You've got tremendous experience on the coaching side. And as we've shown in the data, we have 2 data points. Leaders are joining more calls at a significant rate, 78% increase in directors, and buyers at the executive level are joining calls at similar levels. How do you coach sales leaders and reps to run these calls in this environment?
I will mention a friend of mine. Her book is called, I think it's War Room Playbook, Lisa Magnuson's book. And she talks about essentially a lot of the things that I do when I have a situation where it's an enterprise sale. You're going to have multiple C-level people in the room with the salesperson, is actually going through and doing a dry run, a practice run, drilling every possible scenario that could happen with this particular meeting or call. And what role does each person play in that? Understanding that the salesperson in this is the ringleader of it all. They're the ones that are connecting the dots, making the collaborations. And it is something that needs to be dealt with carefully and not what I'm seeing happen, unfortunately, is that executives and leaders are getting on these calls and they're taking them over, which diminishes the role of the salesperson. Like, why do you even have the salesperson there if you're going to run the whole call? And it also reduces the confidence of that salesperson to be able to do it in the future, because now they're just going to rely on their executive to come in and rescue them. And at the same time, I think that the reason that we're seeing it happen, there's a couple of reasons. One is training and coaching of your team. If you have done that and you have built them with these skills and the mindsets to be able to execute and be emotionally in control in high pressure situations like this, then you trust them to be able to execute on this. But if you haven't trained them, you haven't coached them as you should, now you feel the need to step in because you can't afford to lose a single deal. You can't afford for anything to slide through that. And because of that symptom of not training and coaching them to begin with, we're seeing a lot more executives needing to go in and rescue the deal in their minds, which is just perpetuating a cycle of inefficiency. You can't scale that way. You can't train and coach that way. A lot of people will justify, well, I'm just trying to show them what a good example of it looks like. That's what role play is for. That's what practice is for. Don't practice on your prospects, even if you've got your executive leader in the room. And I will say this. A lot of the executives and leaders that I've seen do this are not any better at sales than the person that's supposed to be doing it. And the reason they do it is because they don't trust their team. Now, the other reason that I'm seeing it happen is because when you have a buyer who's bringing in their C-level, their CFO, their CEO, their COO, then it makes sense to have their counterpart on your side there. But again, it's that being able to relate to them, to maybe ask a question that only a CEO can ask another CEO because it's a sensitive question, that type of thing. That is something that can be rehearsed, that can be practiced and makes sense. But again, if that CEO or CFO can then defer back to the salesperson and their expertise, then that is how the other side of the table is seeing that this is the expert in the room as well, that they're not just there as an order taker. So there's a careful balance. There's a lot of preparation. There's a lot of training and coaching that needs to go into this for it to truly be effective and not a Band-Aid that you're going to have to rip off later and start all over again.
I'm in full agreement. I think it's so critical that the sales professional is the orchestrator, is pulling the pieces together, whether it's two CEOs or two sales leaders, but their ability to start the meetings, their ability to run the meeting, and their ability to close the meeting is such a critical piece. And I've coached that all my career. And I think the key is once they lose that, there's really no owner. And at that point, the follow-up and everything else gets lost into everyone thinking someone else is going to do it. And that's the worst place that anybody could be in.
So one of the things that I would have a salesperson who's in this situation do, and this is something I coach all of my salespeople to do and coach my managers to do with their teams, is to actually start the collaboration and the building of an agenda before you ever set foot in the meeting. So email or talk to or have a conversation with each person who's involved. And what is the most important thing for them to get out of this meeting? What do they need to know? What do they need to learn in order to make a decision to go to the next step? Because you'll find that when you get in a one-on-one conversation with someone, they will tell you something. And then when they get into a group, they might say it or do it or a little bit differently or defer to someone else. So having that collaboration that happens before this meeting where you're going to have multiple stakeholders on either side there, that's going to enable the salesperson to connect those dots before they ever get into the room. And it gets everybody all that much more engaged in the meeting, knowing that they're going to be heard. And when a salesperson starts off that meeting saying, so I understand, Mr. CEO, that this is important to you and that this is important to you. And this is how we're going to address that in this particular meeting. Is there anything else that we should be covering? And it's amazing what a difference that this simple technique makes. And it's also amazing how many times it doesn't happen.
I agree. I mean, I've always loved just the DO, just what's the desired outcome, and even just asking others, just what would be a great outcome of the next 60 minutes, and how do we make sure that we get there?
Yeah.
We are seeing more buyers. I'm curious your thoughts on why we're seeing so many more executives on the buying side show up in calls and what you're hearing from your clients.
I'm hearing that is the case. I actually just had a situation yesterday where the CEO and the CFO was getting involved in the meeting, which was a first for me in this particular client. And so I think that the reason that it's happening is that companies are finding they need to make decisions faster. Sometimes there is the old game of you whisper something to someone else and then they whisper it to someone else and somehow it gets changed in the translation of that. So I think there's a little bit of that's going on the buyer side where they want crystal clear communication. And especially now with revenues down 20, 30, 40% in some companies, the CFO now has to not just figure out, can we afford to do this, but how is this going to impact our business in the third quarter, the fourth quarter, in the beginning of next year? They need to be able to project ROI because otherwise they're not going to be able to make a decision on something now, because they don't want to spend money on anything. So there needs to be a clear understanding of what is the ROI of this and how is that going to play out. And that's the conversations that CFOs, I mean, that is essentially their job.
Have you seen any innovation on the ROI calculator? We've had so much dialogue around, every deal is going in front of the CFO right now, and people are reinventing. We've always known that, but it's up there in a more significant way. We really need to cut through the noise. Extreme ROI has been talked about. Are you seeing innovations on the side in the market?
I have seen some innovations. So I've seen them in the forms of, somewhat complicated Excel spreadsheets where you enter in a number of factors so that you can start to calculate an ROI. I've also seen companies that are actually collaborating on business and use cases, where before they actually start getting into the deal, they're actually working on what is the use case, what is the business case, and collaborating with their teams on that, so that they're not coming to us saying, here's what we think your projected ROI is, and then getting into this debate of, well, that number is not really accurate, and, that projection is not here. So they're actually starting it off with, let's figure out what the ROI business case of this is to see if it even makes sense for us to be talking about this more. Because if it doesn't make sense, then let's not waste our times. That's right. I think that's the innovation. I think that for good or for bad, I think that's what we're going to see happening a lot in the deals that are coming down in the next 6 to 9 months.
Carole, one last area I want to get your thoughts. Motivating and keeping our teams motivated has been a topic that I've been asking many about. And you've got a lot of experience in this field. How can leaders keep their teams motivated today? What are some of the innovative approaches that you're seeing out there?
I'm not sure how innovative they are, because I feel like they've been around for a while, but now our attention to them has become much more acute. One is the daily huddle. And the daily huddle is not a, let's talk about what we're going to do today. Like, the daily huddle is a 5-minute, here's what I'm working on today, here's what I'm struggling with. And having everybody kind of give a stand up as to what they're working on and why that's important, or where they feel that they need help, so that it's more collaborative. I think also having daily coaching sessions with your team, where it's one-on-one and it's 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes at the most because of attention spans, where you're spending time finding out, gauging how are they feeling today? Not just how are you doing, but how are you actually feeling? Because I've noticed for myself and clients that one day we're great, we're going to take on the world, we're going to push our way through this crisis, and everything's going to be great. And then the next day, like, you can't even get out of bed. So that daily kind of where are you at mentally, where are you at emotionally, is an important aspect for leaders to be able to do with their teams remotely. And I think the other part that's really important is to find the fun in things. I've seen all kinds of like fun ways where teams have kind of like done dance moves or had happy hours. But even in your daily one-to-ones, like, if you can get your team member to just smile and be goofy for a minute, it's amazing how much that will lighten someone's mood. I'm doing this all the time with my coaching clients now, because, if I can crack a joke or make fun of something or somehow get them to laugh or smile, suddenly whatever it is that I need to coach them on after that, they're much more open and receptive to. And I think the third thing is that there's a lot of managers out there that don't really understand what's personally motivating to their team. In fact, there's a large percentage of them that probably don't even think that that's important for them to know. But when you understand what's personally meaningful and motivating to someone, it's easy to remind them of that, or ask them about that, or encourage them in that it's still something that's possible that they can do, that you believe that they can do that. That kind of thing, and the direct encouragement of that, neurologically speaking, it lights up the parts of our brains where we're like, oh, okay, I get this. I think one other thing that's important is, and actually there is a study from Harvard and Stanford that shows that when you ask people what they think of something, or how they would solve something, or their opinions on thing, it actually lights up the pleasure part of their brain where they like answering and asking those questions. So when you do that with your salespeople and ask them to collaborate, how do you think we should handle this? Or if you were me, what would you do here? Or what do you think about this? That's something where they're like, oh, you actually care what I think. That's a motivating factor as well. And then those salespeople turn around and they do the same thing with their buyers. How do you think that this should work? What, if in an ideal world, will this look like for you? And so it's a ripple effect. When you can motivate your teams in this way, they can do it with their buyers as well, so that decisions can get made and things can move forward.
It's interesting when you think about all the data points we're talking about in this call, the frontline manager role and the leadership role has really changed right now, from running more daily huddles to more virtual coaching to being on more calls in a significant way. In many ways, that's the group that if you had to say that's going to need the biggest recharge in the next 90 days,
Yeah.
it is the front and second line managers are probably being taxed in ways that they've never been taxed before. And you're inspiring me to think about just how do we recharge that group as they're playing a very heavy role right now, keeping our, sales community engaged.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most important roles in the sales organization because they're the frontline captains on the war front, if you will. They're the ones that, I was on a interview yesterday and someone asked, like, what should managers not be doing right now? The one thing you should not be doing right now as a manager is letting the pressure that you're getting rolled downhill to your people. You're almost like putting this protective bubble around them so that they can be emotionally focused on the buyer and be control of their emotions in that call. And if you're the kind of manager that's forwarding the emails to your team that you're getting from your boss saying, all right, we need to pick up the activity here, it's counterproductive.
Yeah.
And so for managers out there who are listening to this, knowing that how well you take care of yourself, the self-care, the taking the breaks, getting outside and getting fresh air, exercise, eating right, sleeping well, while those might seem like nice to haves, they're absolutely critical for you to be on your game so that you can be of service to your team. Otherwise, you'll find that all of your shortcomings are going to become the collateral damage to your team and everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I appreciate I'm connecting with my, VPs of sales even later today. They're on the call even now. And so just a shout out to them for appreciating what they're doing and great feedback. Carole, thanks so much. Really appreciate you sharing these insights and just kicking off Thursday with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. These daily briefings are great. I've loved the ones I've listened to so far. So I'm glad to be part of it.
Thanks, Carole. I'll see you around.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Bye.